Fill her up.
You're listening to the Gas Digital Network.
Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We are continuing our crossover series with Dave Smith, 1/3 Legion of Skanks, host of Part of the Problem. His comedy special Libertas hit #1 on Amazon, and I was just on his show last week. I wanted, for the people who didn't watch my episode on your show, I wanted to pick up something we were talking about there, which was a really, really funny moment. I love having friends who call me on my BS, which is pretty hard to do because there's so much of it. Hercules came and he's like, okay, like I could deal with those stables, but this, I guess I'd start with rerouting like 3 rivers, maybe, that I have to like kind of have Noah's Ark situation happen. I guess that would make a dent in all this BS. So I was telling you how annoyed I was. Well, no, I was telling you the broader context, how excited I was at all the young kids coming up and how together they are, how talented they are, how motivated they are, how they are just hungry for the fight. And I had made the comment about, if I follow you and you don't act excited at all, I'm going to unfollow you. And Dave just very matter-of-factly was like, well, how would you know? And I'm like, well, I checked his Twitter. But you're like, yeah, but you're on Facebook. What if he did it on Facebook? And I'm like, huh. You know? And it turned out the kid actually had a whole Instagram story about how he sees it. I was literally jumping up and down.
Oh, jeez.
So it was really, really great.
So wait, so you had unfollowed him?
Yes.
For not showing appreciation. Meanwhile,
Yes.
You had changed this kid's life. And then, but you did see it, and I assume this ends with you following him again.
Oh yeah, no, because he watched your episode. Of course, he's a fan of both of ours, and then he's like, he's like, no, I was excited, and I didn't think anything of it. And he's like, here's my simp receipts, and it was dated like 4 days before your episode, so he wasn't making it up. So
you made right by this one kid, and just know that there's hundreds, if not thousands, of others who have this exact same situation.
No, I don't follow thousands of people.
Oh, that's a good point.
It's hard for me to get a follow. Yeah.
All right.
It's tough. I don't.
Fair enough.
What's your strategy for following people? You know what I think? By the way, a lot of people are bothered by how much we talk about Twitter. So let's see if we can do it as much as possible this episode.
Well, that's all we're going to talk about for the rest of our crossover episodes now.
Yeah.
It's a little bit. There's not a precise science to who I follow. I mean, I follow either, like, obviously I follow people who are like heroes of mine who I think are doing great work. Then I'll follow people who just kind of, you know, sometimes it'll just be someone who I just want to have them in my feed.
Yeah.
You know, so like I'd follow like Andy No or someone like that, just because when the riots were going down, he'd always have the latest video of the latest riot. And like, I want to see that. So I follow him for that. Then I follow a few probably just like corporate press accounts just to kind of, you know, again, keep that in my feed. And then I follow some like hard right-wing alternative sites to know what they're reporting on. And then there'll just be sometimes someone will just like say something that grabs me. That's a good enough tweet that you're just like, all right, you just got yourself a fucking follow with that one.
I also have to apologize to some people because, like, here's one example. Like, Tho Bishop, he works at Mises. He's the one who sent me that painting. I had thought I'd been following him this whole time. So, like, there's lots of people where you assume because you interact with them a lot, you're following. And meanwhile, they're, like, wanting, but they don't want to ask. And it's like, oh, I'm an ass. I thought I'd been following you for years, and I haven't.
Well, especially when you have a lot of friends in common with them, or if you're following people who retweet them a lot, you're like, I always see their stuff. I'm sure I'm following them. But, yeah, no, that happens. By the way, if you're somebody who I love and I don't follow, it's purely accidental. I just have no idea.
Oh, no, sometimes, well, I can't say the same. So sometimes but the thing is, it gets, there's a lot of content to dive through. So the more people you follow, the more annoying it gets, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that you and I were talking about during our last episode was how you've been debating a lot of these left libertarians, the ones that you and Tom Woods call the loser brigade. And we made the point, like, let's you and I do a series of mock debates where we'll alternate. One of us is the blue-pilled one and the other one's the blue-pilled one. And I've been giving this a lot of thought, and I'm concerned because I think I'd be really good at it. Do you see what I mean? Like, I don't know that I want to give I don't want to sit down with people who I don't respect, not because of their views, but because I think they're like low quality people. And be like, hey, if you want to go after Dave Smith, like, here's the blueprint.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying. I never really thought about it like that, but that is all right. So that's a fair point.
Because like I'm going to email you right now because I love doing that. Here's one nuke I have, and I don't want to use it. I wouldn't use this, but the point is, like, it could get to this level very easily.
All right. Let me get a second to let it come through. Oh, this is just an episode of us pissing people off.
Yeah. That's how I want to start the year.
It always takes a minute for an email to come through.
Yeah. Anne Rand says, like, you should start the new year, like, doing what you want to do for the rest of the year. So what I want to do is try to antagonize the audience as much as possible, make as many cues that it's an inside joke. Just really kind of use that. As someone once referred to me as haughty, and I'm like, I really like that word because it makes me feel like I'm not an immigrant anymore.
All right, I still haven't gotten it.
Okay, it's no big deal. One of the things I do want to talk about is you had tweeted out not that long ago that the LP is going to be a very different place at the end of 2021 as it was at the end of 2020. I have it I find it kind of reprehensible when people spin disasters as a win. I was a business major, and one of the things that we talk about is business strategy is taking a wash, which is used in accounting. So let's suppose I have a year where I lose $5,000, right? Well, in accounting, you could allocate like certain losses. You know, if I have a house, right, I could spread out the expenses over 20 years, or I could do a lump sum in 1 year. These are accounting techniques that there's a lot of flexibility with. And the concept is, if I'm going down this year by $5,000, let me throw in all my expenses and write them off. So it's like, if a year's going to be bad, I might as well say it was a disaster. And also that gives it's all upside from there. And at a certain point, if it's bad, it might as well be a disaster. It's just be honest. So this kind of thing about, it feels like there is no drive to win or strategy to win anything in the LP. I don't think any capital L libertarian thinks there's any realistic chance of the libertarian candidate becoming elected president, right? However, there is a very real chance of them being able to move the national conversation in politics, as Ross Perot did, as many of these, as Jill Stein did to some extent. I mean, Ralph Nader. These are things where it's like, look, if the major parties are going to have to be talking about these issues, that is enormous progress, because there's certain things that they would just want to sweep under the rug. They don't want to talk about, when you're advocating for war, you're not saying, the truth. You're saying dead kids. Like, I mean, if you want to say that's what Madeleine Albright was asked this, and to her credit, she's like, yeah, it's worth the cost of all these dead kids, but hold them to the fire and answer that. So to spin this Jorgensen, where she lost, like 70% of the vote over the last time, and say this is a success because it was like the second biggest libertarian vote ever, that does not sound like someone who is being, that's not like an argument that's being honest.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we mentioned recently, it's even worse than that because the voter turnout was so high this year. So they actually lost even more. And regardless of all of that, like you're kind of indicating, where are your goals at that you would consider this a success? I mean, how could you possibly look at losing a huge chunk of voters from what you had the previous time around, having absolutely no impact on the national conversation, basically being viewed as nothing but a laughing stock? Right. How could you view that as a success? And why would your bar be so low to begin with when you're looking at an election where the two candidates once again were mostly despised by the American people. Nobody, I mean, there are people certainly who love Donald Trump and there are people who hate Donald Trump. But for the most part, I mean, Donald Trump could never get anything close to 50% approval rating. He was an unpopular figure. Joe Biden, I don't think anybody loved him. I think they just all hated Donald Trump.
He came in 5th in his own party in Iowa, whatever it was, and in New Hampshire too. There were debacles.
Yeah. And so it was almost like this was tailor-made for a third party. Not to mention, if you just zoomed from 1995 to now, you'd be like, oh my God, I mean, now you have a real shot, a third party. You have the internet, you have social media, you can communicate with people, gatekeepers be damned. So there's all these opportunities. And then not to mention the fact that you're a libertarian party the year that the government went totalitarian. Like, you've got the perfect message. You are perfectly set up to just to capitalize on this moment, and none of that happened. So yeah, I've never thought it made any sense to mince words. Like, yeah, this year was a big failure, but I am really encouraged by not just like what you were talking about with some of the young libertarians who are really good. And not just good, but as you mentioned, not just good libertarians, but like people you'd want to hang out with.
Right.
Actually, I was talking to a few, I started like this group chat today where I was talking to a few different libertarians who I just saw who were like outside the Mises Caucus. We're just seeing, they just kind of inserted themselves into some of the conversations on Twitter where it was like loser brigade types versus Mises Caucus types. And they were just kind of like, guys, to the loser brigade, like, this is all so stupid. Like, what are you guys talking about? These are guys who are like getting people excited about libertarianism. Like, what are you doing? And the loser brigade types, well, they are, I mean, I'm not exaggerating. They are self-appointed hall monitor tattletales of the libertarian movement. Like, they spend all day searching through the Mises Caucus Facebook group to be like, look, we found a comment of someone who said something bad. And it'll be one person who nobody knows who they are. It's like some sock account or something who goes like, hey, I think, interracial children end up being more of a burden on society or something like that. And they're like, look, this is the type of environment that they're creating. And you're like, what? Who cares? It's one random Facebook comment. Like, what are we talking about here? And there were a whole bunch of the other guys, all young libertarians, who were just like, guys, this is stupid and petty. And we have real things to focus on. I was really encouraged by that. And I think there's a real desire amongst people in the Libertarian Party to make this something meaningful, like to make it something that could be relevant, whatever that might mean, changing the national conversation, make it something important. And I'm really encouraged by that.
Yeah. And this is something that I don't think they appreciate. You got the email? Mm-hmm. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not one of these types. I'm more like Jigsaw from Saw. So that's why I'm like, all right, we need to sit down and talk like
we
strategy.
We need to work this out a little more.
Yeah, or else it's going to be really, really bad really quickly. I'm not a nice person. One of the things that they don't seem to appreciate is historically, and you and I've talked about the social cost of joining any kind of marginal or fringe movement. It could be, there's two ways to do this. It could be it's above the average where it's like, hey, this is cool. Not that many people get to be a part of this. It's something new, something exciting or innovative. Or it could be like, and I'm using this tongue in cheek because I was certainly a big fan, Dungeons & Dragons, where it's like, yeah, it's fringe because only like people who are low status are engaging with this. And we were the nerds and we played Dungeons & Dragons and it was fine. But if you're trying to build a mass movement, you can't have it where this is what they don't get. They think the Nazis, which they're seeing everywhere, is like with you, like Captain Jew Nazi. They think the Nazis are really alienating a lot of people. And Nazis, as a rule, do alienate a lot of people. That's true. But they're not appreciating how much, when everyone is a complete tool, how much that alienates the layman. I've said this many times, when I first started working in this broader space, one of the things I realized is you can't have it be like these old Communist Party types where it's these filthy old hippies, and they'll have some random book about someone who led a labor strike 50 years ago, and it's like no one cares. You go into that room, you don't think these people are people who are making it happen. And I don't think there's any appreciation of that from that perspective. And there's another thing. There's something in business called either comparative advantage or competitive advantage. I'm getting too confused. But the point is, you're not going to out-Coke Coke. You're not going to out-Coke Pepsi. You have to be able to be better than them on some metric. So you're never going to be, if the left, and they've earned this right, if the left has said, we're the party of fighting racism, we're the party of diversity, why am I going with a secondary party of fighting racism, of fighting diversity, when I could be with that party and I could win? Yeah. I could have a mixed race, half black, half Indian woman as VP, and have she's married to someone who's Jewish, and actually have that accomplished. Why would I go to the place that will have the same thing, but I won't be able to accomplish it? It doesn't make sense in the way people vote.
Yeah, and in the same sense that and even the same thing happens when they're trying to appeal to Republican types. So they'll say something about how they're going to cut the budget or something like that. It's like, okay, well, that's what all the Republicans say. Yeah. So why not go with them? I mean, like if one guy says he's going to cut the budget and another guy says he's going to cut the budget who actually has a chance of winning, why would they not go with the guy who has a chance of winning? It just seemed so obvious. And I can't even believe that this needs to be stressed after the Ron Paul movement, because it seemed like he laid down the blueprint. Like it was just so clear. And so many others had tried and failed, where he actually got people excited. And the obvious answer was, you have to be something exciting and different. That's like nobody else could claim to be filling Ron Paul's lane when he was running. It was like, well, no, there's this guy and there's everything else. And of course, that's what you'd want to present. But I think that a lot of those type of people, because I have noticed, right, like amongst the loser brigade types, there is a certain personality type. But several people made the joke after my latest debate where they were like, why are you debating the same guy every single time? And it really is. It's like the same person every time. And those people, look, they know on some level that if this became a huge thing, they would not be a major factor in it. And that if they're in a really small pond, they can be a relatively big fish in that small pond. But if that pond gets a lot bigger, they're just going to be one out of, thousands. And so there is almost like a social incentive problem with getting them, if they're the guys filling their role right now, they have some role. But if those guys are completely ignored, they have no role. And so the incentives line up for them to try to keep the LP small and irrelevant.
Hey guys, Michael Malice here. I want to tell you about one of my favorite sponsors who are near and dear to my stuff, Sheath Underwear. You see me talking about it on all sorts of shows. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice20, you get 20% off your order. These are going to be the most comfortable underwear you will ever own. What makes Sheath Underwear unique is that they have dual pouches to keep your man parts separated. It sounds weird. The first time they brought them to the studio, I've told this story before, I'm like, what is this? And now I wear them every day because they're so comfortable, especially if you're going hiking, which God forbid I would ever do. But if you're going to go to the gym, treadmill, working out, any kind of physical activity, they really are great at keeping things cool and not chafing and getting that gross, I better take a shower feeling. If you go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice20, you get 20% off your order. And they've got lots of cool styles to choose from. You could have the camo pattern to make your genitals seem even more invisible. Let's get back to the show. Let's talk the broader liberty movement. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you saw this over the last week, and I am absolutely going to take a little bit of credit, because when something this good happens, there's plenty of credit to go around. And I'll take my small part, pat myself on the back, which I like doing anyway. I am shocked. I have never seen this in my lifetime. Any group that has changed its perspective on one of its core positions as violently and quickly as conservatives on the police in the last 2 weeks. Ezra Levant, who runs The Rebel in Canada, he's a big independent voice there. Kurt Schlichter, Jesse Kelly. Kurt's a veteran. Jesse Kelly's a veteran. Tim Pool, I was on his show. He was tweeting out F these police. And I am stunned. I never thought this would ever happen because it's always been back the blue. They're just doing their jobs, and it's reached the point. And and this is the other thing which drives me crazy. It's so lazy and so stupid. People are like, oh, nothing ever changes. It's all the same. It's a great analysis. That's a great take. We got Trump as president, but everything's always the same. To see conservatives turning this hard on the cops.
Yeah.
Did you ever think this was going to happen?
No, although I've, since March, I've seen the potential for this,
Okay.
but previous to the COVID thing, I could have never imagined that this would happen, and this quickly. But it's amazing, and it's really incredible to watch. And I think that one of the things that like Scott Horton always says this, I think is a really important point, is that you attack the left from the left, and you attack the right from the right. And a lot of people just don't inherently get this. A lot of people naturally get this. And it's just kind of common sense if you have social skills. Like if you're talking, and as a libertarian, you can do this without compromising anything, because we are essentially better liberals than the liberals and better conservatives than the conservatives. So what you do is, like, if you're talking to, say, a left-winger about their concerns about anything, their concerns about healthcare or something like that, you don't start talking to them about the Constitution and how there's no constitutional authority because what is that going to do to them? That's already just going to solidify in their mind. It's like, well, yeah, because the Constitution was written by a bunch of rich white dudes who owned slaves and didn't give a damn about anyone having health care. And so who the hell cares what they wrote? But if you start pointing out to them that the government that you're asking to provide health care is actually in bed with big pharma or is in bed with the insurance companies, now all of a sudden you can kind of reach them, because you're not asking them to give up their identity. You're telling them that their identity should lead them to your position. And so that's kind of the essence of how you convert people. You don't, like I said, we talked about this recently, like one of the main reasons why Ron Paul was able to talk about being anti-war is because it wasn't Michael Moore coming in. It wasn't like some fat hypocrite communist coming in saying you're all a bunch of idiot rednecks, you should be anti-war with the hippies. It was like the squarest country doctor who's a family man, who's a Christian, telling you this is why this is the correct position. And then you go, oh, okay, I can keep my identity and still oppose the war. So right now is like the perfect time to attack the right from the right about the police, because all you have to point out to them is that it's just like, look, even when the thing you want the police for, the riots were happening, they stood down and let cities burn. And what are they doing? Who are they enforcing the rules against? Gun owners, business owners.
Yeah.
This is who so you can just attack the right from the right. And to their credit, a lot of them have been seeing this. It's impossible not to see it. That basically the cops are willing to enforce your least favorite Democrat governor's positions, no matter how blatantly unconstitutional they are. So it's beautiful.
And that's another thing to talk about Ron Paul. Ron Paul was clearly a dork, but he was unapologetic. He was true to himself, and he didn't waste time going after individuals and chastising them and shaking his fingers. He was focused on pushing ideas of liberty and speaking his truth. So you can't even imagine in a million years Ron Paul on Facebook at all, let alone being like, oh, look what you said. Well, I mean, there's a complete, in my view, dishonesty about the very failed, thankfully, attempts to cancel Ron Paul because of those newsletters. But this is like, if these people had their druthers, Ron Paul would have been canceled. And then where would this whole liberty movement be? It would not, it'd be ARI. It would be just a disaster, even more so.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, they would be quite happy to have ruined every decent libertarian over the last 40 years. That would please a lot of people. But thankfully, many of those efforts failed. And that it's funny because all of the libertarians, and I'll put objectivists in that camp too, like all of the meaningful ones, all of the ones who actually inspired change and have a lasting legacy, all had tremendous courage. Just completely were willing to go against the acceptable opinions of their day. And even, within the LP, Harry Brown is pretty universally regarded as a hero. I mean, he's dead, and that helps. Like people tend to lionize the dead.
Sure.
But Harry Brown. I don't know if you ever read his piece from September 12th, 2001.
You've just gone. No, I have not. Sorry. I thought you were going to have a random date like comic book guy. On April 13th, 1987, he wrote this editorial. You read it? No, it's the day after 9/11. Okay.
This is an easy date to remember.
Yeah.
I mean, it's maybe, and I don't want to be hyperbolic here. Short of the Declaration of Independence, it might be the greatest piece of American writing ever. Okay. He wrote the day after 9/11. If you can try to imagine what that environment was like. And he wrote this long piece that was basically like, what did you expect? What did you think was going to happen when we've been bombing the shit out of these countries for 30 years? What did you think was going to come back to us? And I mean, that's like, it is hard. And I think for some of the younger people today, like you get a lot of people in the liberty movement who are like 20, 25. So that would put them at, being very young.
Dude, we are so old.
Huh?
we are so old. Like, we must look like Ron Paul to them.
Well, but if you were really, probably, we pretty much are. But like, if you were 6 on 9/11,
you don't know what that means.
You don't exactly understand. Like, so I think nowadays pointing that out doesn't carry the same amount of weight. But oh my God, the day after 9/11 to dare suggest something like that it was like, you're taking your career in your hands right now by doing this. Like you might be completely ruined. And he was like, I don't care. I'm telling the truth. And like, those are the type of people who get remembered. So all of these people who have this attitude of like, oh, this guy stepped out of bounds a little bit over here, stepped out of bounds a little bit over here. This is the most self-defeating attitude for any radical to possibly have. And it's not even to suggest that sometimes it's not great to step out of bounds. Like sometimes you could just be a dick by stepping out of bounds. I mean, so like for example, right? If you're talking to like a transgender person who is like born a man and now identifies as a woman and presents as a woman and likes to be called she, and you go, it goes, nah, you're a dude. I'm going to call you he. You're kind of a dick. Like that's a dick thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, just fucking call her by the name she wants to be called. Who the fuck cares? Like what,
But right, do you have a problem calling Alice Cooper Alice? Well, it's a guy. It's a girl's name. Yeah. Fine. Pretend it's Alice Cooper.
Yeah, right, exactly. And so now, if me and you were having a discussion and you said, do you believe that transgender women are biologically men? And I were like, well, yes, I do believe they're biologically men. I don't think that's a dick thing to say. Right. That's just having a discussion. But to call someone that to their face, you're kind of a dick, right? So I'm not saying that it's never wrong to step outside of what is considered the bounds of what's okay. But if you're a radical and you're going to make the center of your existence knocking people whenever they step out of the bounds of allowable opinion, it's the most guaranteed to fail strategy you could imagine. Because what you need to do is create an environment where people can say things that are considered wildly unpopular and say that when they hit the truth, like that's going to be the most important thing that's ever said.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that post 9/11 environment. I remember very, very vividly, don't you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was like, I was 18, I believe, when 9/11 happened. So I was right at the, like the age, maybe like the earliest age that you could really kind of understand what's going on here. And I was also like, I thought, I mean, my mother was really terrified that I was going to get drafted into a war.
Wow,
because like we didn't know what was fucking happening after that, and she had lived through Vietnam and seen like friends and stuff getting drafted, and she was really scared they were going to bring back the draft. And it was just such a crazy time. It was like the 90s up until 9/11. Even though it was 2001, that was like the end of the 90s. The 90s were just like, it was just like a party, and America was doing good, and we're the most powerful country, and no one could ever possibly touch us. And then to get touched so hard, like that, it was really just unbelievable. And the environment that swept over the country was just unlike anything else that I had ever lived through at the time. This year was pretty crazy, but
no, but I remember at the time we were all kind of looking around, and we were like, oh, what does this mean? It was like in a very different sense. There's a Venn diagram here. It was like when Trump got elected, because everyone was like, what is this going to look like? Like no one had any idea, right? It's like, is this going to be like a Schwarzenegger governorship? Is this going to be like Hitler? Is this going to be like a clown show? Is it a mix? And we were like, well, there's no precedent. I mean, Pearl Harbor was a military attack, right? It wasn't, and it was by a government that was already in the process of a war. And we had always been talking about, okay, are we going to enter World War II? This was, and the visuals were so crazy too. And the other thing that people don't appreciate is not only their cell phones stopped working, and that's fine, but you couldn't watch anything else on TV. Like every channel was only 9/11 stuff for like a good maybe a week. I don't remember.
And that TV was life. There wasn't like, there was an internet, but it wasn't the internet. It's almost like today, the equivalent for that, the equivalent of every single television station being on the same thing would be like if you went onto your computer and logged in and there was only one website, and also you went on your phone and it was only the same website, and then turned on your TV and it was only that same thing. Like every medium had the same thing on it. And for them to take out the Twin Towers is like, historically, the thing that comes to my mind is the Nazis marching through the Arc de Triomphe. Like that was like moment that Parisians would look outside your window and see the Nazis marching through your symbol. Like, this is ours now. We took this from you. It was that the Twin Towers were America. That was like one of the, like big, like visual things that represented America. It represented the center of capitalism, and New York City, the tallest buildings, and to see them gone, like they took that from you. It was just like this. It was more than just the people who died there, which obviously is tragic on its own, but it was like a victorious attack against a country that thought they were impenetrable.
Yeah, and we also, I thought it was a given that we were going to have another Great Depression. And so that was a big concern. Like, okay, am I going to be destitute? Thankfully, that didn't happen, but that very easily could have. And it's impossible to convey to people who weren't there. You were in New York at the time, I'm assuming, as well. Yeah. To what it was like to be a New Yorker during that period. And also, it's also very weird when you're walking down the street then, knowing that everyone around you is thinking the same thing you are. Like, there was no escaping it. And that's what was really so, I guess it's kind of like a bit like the COVID times to some extent, but here there is some outlets, you could go on Twitter, you could go and watch podcasts, you could talk to your friends about this stuff, but that's all you were talking about because we had no idea what it meant.
Yeah. And there's something about it that, people will ask sometimes. I know I've been given this line of criticism when I'm talking about like blowback and how much, like hatred we inspire around the world by our military actions. And then there'll be some example, like, there's some guy who's like, even like say Osama bin Laden, who listed as one of his major grievances against, the United States of America, our treatment of the Iraqis. He listed, not only the bombing campaigns, but the decade of sanctions, which is what you were referring to that Madeleine Albright said. Madeleine Albright said straight up, 500,000 children have died from starvation and malnutrition, according to the UN. Do you think that's worth it? And she goes, yeah, we do. We believe that's worth it. And this was one of the things, not Madeleine Albright specifically, but this campaign was one of the things that Osama bin Laden mentioned. And people would be like, yeah, but whatever. Do you really think some Saudi who's hiding out in Afghanistan cares about how the people of Iraq felt? And you're like, well, look at what, well, I mean, look after 9/11, there were people in Hawaii who were joining the military, who were down to go fight and die because someone attacked New York City. Now, those places aren't very close, but they both identify as Americans, and identity means a lot to people.
It wasn't even that. Arafat, who's the head of the PLO, he's dead now, he got himself in front of a camera and he started donating his AIDS-ridden blood because he's like, I am having no part of this. I'm with, I'm with, the Jews today. Well,
because they knew what was coming. But there's something interesting about where our country has gone over the last 20 years. And the fact that, when me and you were commenting a lot this year on when New York City was just, getting decimated, that's by lockdowns and then by riots and all this shit. And you had a lot of people in red states who were like, well, fuck them. Fuck them. They elected these politicians and they chose this course of action. So that's how they're going to feel. And it does kind of make you wonder because, for as much contempt as so many of the coastal elites have for, say, the center of this country, when New York City and Washington, D.C. were attacked, the center of the country disproportionately was willing to go fight and die for in the name of New York and Washington, D.C. being attacked. Now, they went and fought and died in really stupid wars, don't get me wrong, but the fact is they were willing to go do that. And I wonder whether they would have that same feeling today. I mean, we are so much more divided as a nation than we were back then. And right after 9/11 was the most unified the country's been in my lifetime, like no question about it. By the way, not saying that's completely good. I mean, the unity led to like the Patriot Act and the war in Iraq and a lot of bad shit, but just making the observation, like we were as close to one as you could be after 9/11.
What people also don't remember probably is there was a time, a big rumor about suitcase nukes, and they would talk about this in the media constantly, how Al-Qaeda is going to get a nuke that you could hide in a suitcase, and they're going to bring it to some soft target and blow up New York City. And the thing that they also pointed out is like, look, they bombed the World Trade Center earlier. They had a van bomb. It went off. It killed a few people, but it didn't take down the building. So they're like, we're going to keep hitting it until we take it down, right? So the argument was, well, they had another plane, United 93, that went down. They're not going to stop until whatever that target was is going to get destroyed. And I remember I was at the north of Washington Square Park, and I was looking up Fifth Avenue, which I think stops there if I got my streets correctly. And I was looking at all these beautiful buildings, and I thought to myself, you know what? Like, if they nuke New York, like, take me with it. I can't leave this place. I love it so much. And for the first time, like, what they've done to New York is so much worse than like what Al-Qaeda has done in a sense. And it is causing me physical pain, what's being done to this city. All like my last two, I've got like four friends here. Two of them, they're a couple, like six, let's say six, whatever. A couple of them, Jay and Ulku, they just told me they're moving to Austin January 31st. They're not even slowing down these lockdowns. They're ramping them up. And everyone is telling me, I just got a DM from Adrian Curry, who was on my show a couple weeks ago, get the hell out of there. They're like implementing this Gestapo stuff, and I don't know what to do. And it's real. I know you obviously got out of Dodge. You have a family. I don't. But dude, it's really doing a number on me.
Yeah, no, it's horrible. And it is like, I'm born and raised in New York City. That's my city. And I have a strong emotional connection to it. I don't understand where people don't get that. And this is also part of the reason why I was so outraged by the rioting this summer, which was a test that I think many libertarians failed. And like, I was just outraged by that. It's like, it was like, well, we're against police brutality, and this group is saying they're against police brutality, and we're not racists, and they're against racial, discrimination or whatever, or for racial justice or something. And so, because these abstract ideas that I have line up with the abstract ideas that they're putting forward, I have to support this movement. And you're like, fuck your abstractions, dude. Fuck your concepts. Look at what's happening. They're destroying people. Like, they're destroying their businesses. They're destroying, people's livelihoods. And of course, that's nothing compared to what the government's done with these lockdowns since March. And it's like, yeah, they are ruining the from my perspective, the greatest city in the world. And that it's awful. It's awful to see the position they put people in.
Hey guys, I want to talk to you about Blue Block's blue light glasses. If you go to blublox.com/you're welcome or use code welcome at checkout, you get 15% off, you get free shipping. You know how if you stare at the screen for a long time, like I'm on Twitter for hours, you get eye strain. Everything starts to get blurry. Blue Blocks is here to help. These are blue light glasses that block the blue light coming off your screen that causes eye strain. In fact, the founders of Blue Blocks were not happy with the science behind the leading glasses, so they made their own. They've got 40 frames to choose from, high quality lenses designed to get more work done during the day, and you sleep better at night, and they look really cool. Look at this picture of me wearing them. Pretty fetching. They're available in prescription, non-prescription, reader's glasses, something for everyone. And for every pair you buy, they donate a pair of reading glasses to someone in need. So if you go to blublox.com/you're welcome, or you just use the code welcome, you get 15% off your order, and you could be wearing my glasses. Then you look as smart as me, hopefully smarter. Let's get back to the show. How often do you get to New York nowadays? You guys are doing Skanks remotely, right?
No. We're doing it at the studio. I'm going in tonight to do it at the studio. So I've been going in, once a week, for a while now. I don't do much. We were doing it at the stand when the weather was good because we would do it outdoors there and stuff. But then they put the curfews back in, so they fucking shut that down. But I will say, I don't know if me and you talked about this, but so I was in New York. We did like an afternoon episode, which was one of the only ones we did. And it was the day that they called the election for Joe Biden. And it was a beautiful day outside. It was like warm and it was nice and everyone was out and people were really happy that Trump was going to be out. Which, look, I despise Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I'm second to no one in my hatred of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But I got to say, man, it was just so nice. It was just so nice to be in New York City for the first time since March, where it felt like a good day. And like people were kind of happy and they were out and there was a good energy in the city. And it was really wonderful, but also so depressing when you realize that you're like, oh, there hasn't been one of these. There hasn't been one of these since the beginning of March.
I got a text last week, and I think it was from Buzz, who ran Buzz's Big Gay Dance Party at Borgfest. Maybe it was somebody else, and I apologize. I'm getting you too confused. And it said, she had a map of when I come back to New York of places I want to visit, and she updated it, and it was like 60 to 70% of the places were gone. And I mean, yeah, you're going to revert toward the mean when this stuff is over. But at a certain point, like if I'm starting out and I'm excited and I want to make a new business, if the higher the cost, the more difficult it is to pull off. And you could say, okay, I failed in New York, whatever. But if it's a given I'm going to fail, why wouldn't I want to be that big fish in, Nashville, Miami, or, Colorado somewhere, as opposed to, this dead town?
Well, yeah. I mean, and look, a fucking H-bomb could go off and assuming it's just one, some people would survive and we'd start rebuilding and, all of that. But to measure what's been destroyed, through that, I mean, there's so many stories. You can't there's this fucking little Chinese restaurant. It was really, really good Chinese spot on 78th Street and Broadway. It's right
Ollies?
across from Stand Up New York.
Is it Ollies?
I can't remember the name of it.
Okay.
It's like on the west side, on the southwest corner of 78th Street and Broadway. And it was just this dope little Chinese spot. We used to go there literally when I started comedy. It was like 14 years ago. We used to go there after shows at Stand Up New York, all the time. And then I lived in the Upper West Side for years. I used to go there all the time. Little family run place, been there. It's got to be at least 20 years old, and they're gone. That's it. That's over. That's done. And there's just thousands and thousands of examples like that throughout the city. And it's really heartbreaking. Yes, some other business might come in at some point, but what about that staple? You know what I mean? That was that was a part of the community for decades. And that's it. It's over. And what the fuck are those people doing now? Who knows? How destroyed is their family? We don't know. But that's just all over, happening everywhere. And don't get me wrong, it's not, it's not to say that COVID doesn't exist or COVID's not bad, but you're what level of this is okay? What are you willing to how much can we put up with? And the whole thing in New York City this whole year, I've never, even after 9/11, dude, even right after 9/11, the day of 9/11, that afternoon, there was something beautiful about, I remember, so I was in Brooklyn, and where I lived in Brooklyn, I was in Prospect Heights. And we, me and a few of my friends, we fucking like got out of school. We actually forged a note. Is how we got out of high school. And I was fucking boys with the security guard. I used to buy weed from the security guard. But so he fucking just let us out. Or it was like, gave him a note that was obviously forged. And he was like, whatever, get out of here. And we all left high school.
Who's Luis Gomez?
This is the pre-Lewis days.
Why are the S's backwards? He doesn't know how to write, okay?
But so we got out and we went back to my place, maybe like 7 of us or something like that. And we were, and then I went to go grab my brother, who was like young. He was a little kid at the time. I went to go grab him from school. And I'm walking to go pick him up, and I'm walking up Flatbush Avenue at this point. So this must be like a few hours after, you know, the towers had gone down at this point. And there were people walking up Flatbush Avenue covered in head to toe in debris, because the subways were shut down. So your only option was that people were walking over the Brooklyn Bridge and walking back to Brooklyn. And it was like insane seeing this. But you'd be walking down the street, and I remember people, because it was like the neighborhood I grew up in, and people who you see every day, but you don't really talk to, were stopping to talk to you. And they were like, hey, are you okay? Is your family okay? Is this and that? And people were lining up, you know, to give blood. It was like that really sad story where people were lining up around the hospitals to give blood. And then eventually, you know, the hospital people were like, we don't need blood. Like, there's not.
Yeah, right.
Everyone's dead.
No one lost a foot. They lost their head.
Yeah, it's like, you know, like there might have been a few people, but pretty much we had enough blood to cover them. It's the people there are dead. Yeah. But it was like everyone came together. Everyone was trying to heal. It didn't destroy the culture of New York. We came back stronger from it. This is different. This is like for the last fucking 8 months, you go into New York City and businesses are shut. Some of them are boarded up, you know, when they were afraid of the riots. That people have their face covered. It's cold and dark and depressing. The homeless people have like taken over and they're everywhere. It's just like, this is awful. It's like, it's something out of like a fucking, like a dystopian Rand novel. It's like something out of Anthem or something like that. Like, what is this? There's no human beings. You don't see their fucking face anymore. Everyone's just like a number, and it's awful.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't the first time something like that has happened. I'll talk about something very specific, which is I just finished watching a documentary about the Club Kids, which was in New York City in the 90s phenomenon. The leader of them was Michael Alec, who had a night at Limelight, which is a former church. They made a documentary about him. They made a movie about him starring Macaulay Culkin. I visited him in jail. I have one of his paintings or whatever, and he just died on December 25th. He was a real sociopath. And you know how like every time people read about like in the DSM-4, you're like, oh, this sounds like me. Like, and you think it's a thin line between you and the person who's institutionalized. Let me assure you, it is a very thick line. Okay, so to both of the women listening to this who thinks the sociopath is your boyfriend who no longer pretends to care about your dumb feelings, no. It is creepy and weird talking to an actual sociopath, because when they talk, you realize, oh, this person isn't wired the way I am, and you are on edge. It was very, very odd.
Well, like in what way? Can you like describe that at all?
Sure. So he was talking about for those who don't know, it's funny because I think people I take it for granted everyone knows this story, and it's a very fringe kind of thing. Basically, him and this guy named Freeze, they were having a fight with this guy Angel, who was one of their buddies, but Angel was he was the loser brigade in the Club Kids, and he was a drug dealer, so people put up with him, and it got physical. And he got his head hit 3 times with a hammer. Angel did. So then they just put a like pillow over his face, and they like injected him with Drain or whatever. Like everyone was very high at the time, and killed him. And they're like, okay, what do we do with the body? So they basically put like the body in the bathtub, covered it in like lime or Drain. I don't remember what it was. Had parties. They're like, what's that smell? They're like, oh, it's the plumbing. Freeze went to Macy's, got some butcher knives. Michael like took 20 bags of heroin, chopped him up, and then they put him in the East River. They took a cab. The cab driver helped them toss the box into the river, and for $20, he didn't ask what was in it. They're like, oh, it's just dishes. And so he was describing to me how, and after they did this, like he would walk around in Angel's trademark boots and like joke about having chopped up Angel, and everyone's like, oh, Michael, you're so outrageous. And he was like, I wanted to be caught because of the enormous guilt I was feeling, he was talking about. But then when he was describing guilt, wasn't at all guilt. He was just describing how it was annoying not having closure in the whole situation. You're like, oh,
Wow.
this person literally doesn't know what the emotion of guilt is. He's just kind of like, oh, like, it's like when you don't do your homework and you're just waiting for the teacher to be like, where's the homework? That's not guilt. It's like, that was the feeling he was describing and perceiving as guilt. And I'm like, oh, wow. So it was really off-putting. But yeah, that was a whole other era of New York, this nightlife, which was completely destroyed by Giuliani intentionally, understandably, because it was really kind of a very seedy, dark thing. And that, on the other hand, you had the kind of crazy, androgyny creativity kind of aspect to New York, and a lot of important people came out of that scene. But again, that was just one segment of New York that was kind of decimated. It wasn't Broadway and the restaurants, and look, the museums are going to be okay, that's fine, but like this, just everything, the little bookstores, the little cafes, there's nothing that is safe from this situation. Just have a store where you can't come in here if you're obese or elderly. It's just there's never been anything like this that's been so systemic and broad in its assault on what makes New York special.
And there's something that's really like on a Randian chord. There's something that is the most like Ayn Rand used to say things like, because her whole philosophy was around kind of flipping this whole altruistic centered, like modern bullshit, where she was like, everybody, like, this is the opposite of what's noble. So she'd be like, like, for example, I remember her talking about things like, she'd be like, where we spend all this money, investing in like, whatever, like helping out kids who are like borderline retarded, learning how to read or something like that. And then everybody feels good about themselves because we invested and we got this kid who wouldn't have been able to read at all up to reading at a 3rd grade level as an adult. And she's like, all of these resources should be poured into the genius who's going to make all of our lives better.
That was on Donahue, and the exact quote is like, what do you have left? A half idiot who can barely write his name. Meanwhile, there are no schools, or very few for the gifted children who all our lives depend.
Yes, but that's right. But she's kind of right. And it's like, this is, by the way, when, people like that are at their best, is when you're saying something that really sounds like a fucking shitty thing to say, but is right. But like, you're right. That is the truth. Fuck, God damn it. You know what? Genius. The reason why we're fucking here and why we have no concern about, food insecurity, and why I can talk to you through this fucking machine and you can hear me in real time. And now everybody we're all of our audience can hear this, is because of geniuses. It's not because of fucking, you know what I mean? Some idiot somewhere as poor as that guy might be. It's because of like great men who came up with this. And the idea that all of the healthy, functioning people have to sacrifice everything for the old and the sick and the fat is just so anti everything that Rand was about. And I don't agree with Rand on everything, but this certainly does feel sick. Like the idea that like, oh, there's some 95-year-old who's probably going to die next year anyway, but might die in 2 months rather than in 12 months if they get this germ. For that, we have to shut down, like a 7-year-old's life.
The earth.
Yeah. Like, so what, we're sacrificing our 7-year-olds to keep a 95-year-old alive one more year. This is, that it is, I suppose, altruistic in some sense, and then feels like the most immoral thing ever. So I'm kind of like, I guess Rand was onto something.
Are you predicting that, and this is going to be a tough question because I don't think either of us have a good answer. We all know that things historically try to, like we're talking about with the riots, like at first they were turning on the cops and they went back to blue because the alternative is the rioters. You're going to pick the cops. And that's a very rational kind of approach given those two choices. Do you think this increasing division between conservatives and the police is something that is going to continue? Or do you think it's going to revert back to nothing?
I think it's going to continue. And I think that's good. I think that the division between conservatives and right-wingers in general, not just conservatives, the division between right wingers and the entire establishment, the entire cathedral is only going to get wider and wider. And I think that there's no way that they can pull them back in. And like, man, it makes so much sense. Why should they? There's no effort being made to pull them back in.
Right.
The left has painted themselves into a corner where they can't make an effort to pull them back in, because what are you doing? You're trying to pull Nazis in? I mean, why would you want to do that? Everything, look, if you're a left winger, if you're a good left winger even, everything is designed around pandering to you while giving you nothing of actual substance. But everything is pandering to you. Every commercial, every billboard, every politician, they're all pandering to you, but they're not giving you anything of actual substance for it, you know? But if you're a right winger, everything is a middle finger to you.
Yeah.
Everything. There's everything about it. The whole system is like, you know, it's like the worst thing in the world you can be is like a white guy who cares about his own family and taking care of them. And the best thing you could be is like, you know, a father who would be happy if your son was in a dress. Your whole way of life is evil. Everything's against you. This has been building for a long time. And now you're like, and I'm saying this from their perspective, but like your president, your hero was robbed after conspiring against him for the 4 years of his presidency. And then he was robbed, thrown out. We're all going to accept it. We're going to install Biden as your leader, and the cops are going to enforce every last inch of it. I don't see how that trend reverses and goes the other way. So I don't know, but my guess would be it continues.
I would agree with you. And here's another reason, because I think a lot of conservatives have been blue pilled and historically. And I think it was people like us and, you know, broader kind of anarchists, whatever, who were like, no, you're being lied to. And because they've never heard anything like that the Constitution is statism, like that never entered their head, like they were at least receptive to hearing it out, like, oh, because this is new, they didn't know how to grapple with it. After Kavanaugh, I mean, that was such a red pill for conservatives. We're like, okay, these people aren't messing around. There's no level they wouldn't go. I mean, to see him on TV, a dad, you know, volleyball coach, like a choir boy, talking about how he didn't get laid in college is just horrifying. You just want, it's like Principal Skinner when he's talking about, I am a virgin.
Yeah, that's such an important point, man, because there's something there that shows the real divide, right? The fact, and this was true, another great example of this was the Covington Catholic kids, right? When a right winger looked at this white Christian father and husband, they looked at that and thought, that seems to me to be evidence that he's a pretty good guy and probably didn't do this. And the whole establishment looked at that and said, that's evidence that he did it.
Yeah, he's probably
that's evidence that he's probably guilty. The same thing that you see and look at and say, oh, that's good. They look at it and say, no, that's an indication of evil. And that's what happened with the Covington Catholic kids, is that they looked at them and they went, okay, so you're telling me white kid from Catholic school with President Donald Trump hat on at a pro-life rally, obviously he's got to be guilty of something. But to the right winger who looks at that, they go, that's like the epitome of good.
It's like Ned Flanders, yeah.
Yeah, that's what we want. That's what we wish all kids could be. As every day on the like fucking television or the internet, they're seeing like fucking, I don't know, some kids who are awful or something. And they're like, this was like a great kid. But so that's the real disconnect there, is that what you see as completely good, they see as evil. And then to your point, that they're not trying to just, prevent you from getting something. They're trying to ruin you. And that's what they did with both of those guys, with Kavanaugh and with Sandman. They tried to ruin them unsuccessfully on both counts.
But that's the other thing. I think they can't unring that bell. Like a lot of those conservatives, like, okay, now I know what we're dealing with. When you see, I'm sure you saw this over the weekend, the cops storming that person's house and trying to pull them out in Canada. And conservatives stamping on flags and saying F the blue. I don't think that's the kind of thing you can have complete amnesia for. When you see what they did with the Black Lives Matter protests and rioting, as opposed to, we're going to make sure you don't secretly serve fried chicken or biscuits or like sushi to like 10 people in your restaurant that you and your family built, it's going to take a lot for them to get Men in Blacked and pretend that none of this had ever happened. And for that, I am very, very excited and very, very grateful.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And it's going to be impossible to pretend in the damage that comes over the next few years that this isn't what caused it. Everybody's going to know, because this was such a big thing. You know, it's not like lowering interest rates for a little bit and then there's an artificial boom and then the bust, and then they blame the bust on a bunch of other things. It's going to be obvious what this pain is a result of. But
it's also going to be obvious what the cops were willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're going to say, which they often do, oh, you know, these cops aren't willing to enforce unconstitutional orders, like when you're storming a restaurant where the only crime is serving people food, and it's not even packed to the brims.
This is, by the way, one of the things that I think autistic libertarians have a really tough time with. And I was talking about this on one of my podcasts recently, and I interacted with some of them who are having a tough time with this, but I was trying to explain that. So libertarians will say, and by the way, they're right. It's not that they're wrong. It's just that they're autistic, right? So you're not wrong. That they'll say something like, well, look, and I've done this before too. I've compared the war on drugs to slavery. I think it is a modern form of slavery. If you take somebody for the crime of having a plant and enslave them, that is every bit as immoral as enslaving someone for the color of their skin. It's neither one is a justification to lock a man in chains. Morally speaking, it's the same thing. So libertarians will make points like, oh, this is nothing new. The cops have been enforcing drug laws all of these years. And you're like, yes, on like the autistic level definition of morality, you are correct. But here's the human aspect that you're missing in all of that. Drugs are widely considered not good, not good for society. It's been accepted a long time ago that, drugs aren't great. And that may not be 100% true. Weed's really not a very big problem, and there's other drugs. But, you know, like you see a heroin addict lying dead on the street, me and you could both make a very compelling argument for why heroin should still be legal. But you understand where someone sees someone who threw their life away and is, with heroin, and is like, yeah, that's bad. We don't want that. There's a general consensus that that's bad. There is not a general consensus that going to work is bad.
Right, yes.
There's not a general consensus that having your family over for Thanksgiving is bad. Those are considered like the most normal, healthy things that people can do because they are, you know? And so when that's being outlawed and cops are still willing to enforce that, you've got a whole different can of worms that you're opening for normies.
Dave, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this episode?
My favorite part of this episode was you emailing me your blue-pilled attack on me, which I'm now pretty assured that you're not going to use against me because it would have been devastating.
You are dead.